Welcome to the Living After Faith podcast, a podcast designed to help you as you leave religion and move forward with your life. We are the official podcast of RecoveringReligionists.com, a recovery group founded by Dr. Darrell Ray, the author of The God Virus. We welcome your feedback. You can contact us by going to livingafterfaith.com, at facebook.com/livingafterfaith, and follow us on Twitter at LAF with me. And now, here's today's program on Living After Faith with Rich and Deanna Joy Lyons.
I'm Rich Lyons.
I'm Deanna Joy Lyons.
Come laugh with me.
Today we are talking to the fabulously talented author, world traveler, journalist, Guy P. Harrison. Now, some of you may be familiar with his book, 50 Reasons People Give for Believing in a God, which Rich tells me was really very helpful when he was coming out of his religion and starting to question.
That book was one of those, there are several books that I recommend everybody get. And of course, you got to have Dawkins, you got to have Hitchens, you got to have Dennett. Sam Harris, you can do that. But this is one of those books that was so influential to me because it gave reasons, and every one of those, or not every one, but many of those reasons were the same reasons I had echoed. Those are the same reasons that I had said. They're the same things that I would have told you were the reasons I believed in a God. And then in a very soft, it's soft atheism here, in a very soft way, it explains why those reasons don't really work. And when you hear why they don't really work, that puts you in a place of having to look at your own reasoning.
Yeah, and that's really important because a lot of our listeners tell us that when they were coming out of their faith, when they were starting to question their beliefs, what they would do is go on the internet or talk to friends and argue about why they believed in God. And then those arguments would get shot down in a way that showed that there wasn't any good reason for a lot of these beliefs.
And if you're interested in reason and you discover you don't have one, then you have to do something else. Let's go ahead and bring Guy on. He's also got a new book. We're going to talk about that. He's got some books he's written before as well. We're going to talk kind of the whole schmear here. Guy P. Harrison, welcome to Living After Faith.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I want to start with 50 reasons, and the reason I do is because I have several reasons, not 50. But the reason I want to start with that is because of the influence it had on me when I'd reached the point that I realized I couldn't believe in God, but I didn't really understand why. And I knew what led me to that decision, or not really decision, led me to that place where it was like the tooth fairy. I couldn't look back over my shoulder and say, no, really, I believe that. I couldn't do that. So I was at this place, and I picked up this book. I was on one of those shopping trips. I made a lot of shopping trips to bookstores, and I go through the bookstore and in the atheist section, and I found this book, and I thought, that might be pretty interesting to read. So I take it home and just consumed it because so many of these reasons were reasons I would have actually given for my belief. And just hearing a simple, logical explanation of why that's really not a logical reason was so reassuring to me. And we have people ask us these questions all the time. So that's why we want to have you on. So 50 reasons. What was your inspiration?
Yeah, well, I'm glad the book worked for you because that's exactly what my goal was. I wanted to present a book that I thought was missing in the market. I wanted a book to be available to people that didn't argue at them, wasn't overly aggressive, and didn't lecture to them about why they might want to allow some doubt let some doubt creep into their belief systems. And what I did, I said, I've traveled all around the world, talked to people in just about every kind of religion, from the most devout believers to the most casual believers. And it's interesting, when I ask the very basic questions like, well, how do you know that's true? How do you know that God is real? Why do you believe this? I got pretty much the same handful of answers from everybody, from Hindus to Muslims to Jews to Christians to fundamentalist Christians to very liberal Christians. And I thought, why not a book that respects the believer enough to actually respond to what they are saying, not what non-believers think are the reasons they believe and all that. I said, each chapter heading is really like a quote that I've heard many times from believers, and I respond in I think a fairly gentle and respectful manner to those reasons for belief. And the thing is, I try to point out over and over that, maybe your God or gods are real, possibly, but there's a lot of room for doubt, and enough doubt hopefully, to keep you from sacrificing your reason and maybe mistreating your fellow humans, rejecting science, hopefully to prevent you from doing these things. So just enough doubt. So, even if we can't, we probably maybe will never rid the world of religion. It just seems so appealing, so attractive to so many people. But I think certainly we can inspire enough people in the world to think for themselves and to ask the hard questions and be courageous enough to admit on some things you just don't know. I think if we can do that, it'll be a better world. If Osama bin Laden had a little bit of skepticism, a little bit of doubt when he was 10, 11, 12 years old, I don't think he would have been so sure that flying planes into buildings was a great idea. He might have, he could have been a Muslim, a peaceful guy his whole life, never caused any problems, but he didn't have enough doubt. He didn't have enough skepticism. If I wish I could have, had a time machine and put my book into his hand when he was 13 or 14, because the presentations I give are just so simple, and they don't argue believers into a corner, and I don't try to win debate points. I just try to inspire people to think for themselves. Because if you do that, I think it's pretty hard to be so sure about your belief that you're willing to, bring harm to the world or to yourself.
One of the things that I found reassuring, it sounds strange, you're walking away from religion, you're looking for some reassurance. But one of the things I found so reassuring from your book was one of my problems with religion, my first go-to of how do I know there's a God is I just know. It's just obvious to me. It can't be any other way. I just know. And I was so reassured to see I'm not the only person on the planet who based his entire life choices on something that you just know. Really?
Yeah. Well, Rich, that was chapter 1 of my book, because most atheist skeptical writers, they skip right past the most, for me, it's the most common reason of all. People say, well, my God is obviously real. What do you mean? It's not even worth discussing. It's not worth debating. That's the answer you get from 90% of believers around the world. It's not even a topic for debate or discussion. It's just obvious. And that's chapter 1 of my book. My God is obvious. And what I point out is that, well, no, it may feel that way in your particular small corner of the world, but that's not really true. Because if Jesus was obviously true, then Christianity would have a majority of the world's population as believers, but it doesn't. Christians are a minority of the world's population, as are all religions. So there's no one God that is so obvious that everyone sees it and either chooses to worship it or reject it. It's just not the case.
I want to thank you you mentioned it. I want to reiterate this. This book is not going to argue with you. It's going to give you a lot to think about. And we have a lot of our listeners who say, I'm doubting myself. I really can't believe that, but I'm not sure. I really, people with a lot of doubt. And I think that was the concrete of this book was that it let me listen to logic, examine myself, and say, you just can't use that as an answer. I mean, you just can't do it.
Yeah, exactly. Another example is you will hear over and over around the world in virtually every religion, you will hear, I know my religion is true. I know my God or gods are real because I had an uncle who was dying with cancer and we prayed for him and he was healed. You'll hear that in North Carolina from a Christian. You'll hear that in India from a Hindu. You'll hear that in Jordan from a Muslim. And, it's so easy to get people to think in new ways about these claims. You say, well, hold on. The ancient Greeks prayed for things and they claimed that those prayers were answered. That does not prove that Apollo, Zeus, Poseidon are all real. Muslims pray for things and they claim to have success, about half the time probably. Well, that doesn't mean that the Quran is really literally the word of some God. Christians claim to have healings all the time. They claim to, pray for miracles and get them all the time. But that doesn't mean Jesus is real because it happens everywhere. It's more about how people, how they are faulty in the way they assess their prayers, the way they keep the record keeping in their head. That's where the obvious problem is with it.
That's just like psychics. People will go, that person obviously is so psychic because they knew they knew all these things about me. And then when you go back and you analyze it critically, you go, well, actually they made a lot of wrong guesses. But the person who was seeing them remembered the right guesses because those were the things that struck them as powerful. The things that were wrong, they just skip over in their head. And same with those prayers and miracles.
Absolutely. There's a thing called confirmation bias that all of us are vulnerable to. We always have to be aware of it because we are just, the way our brains work, we will cling to the things that confirm what we already believe in, and we will ignore or outright reject all the things that contradict what we believe in. And we have to, it doesn't matter how smart you are, how educated you are, that's how we work. And you always have to try to be aware of it and fight against that so you can think clearly and not make bad conclusions. Because you're going to remember, that's exactly, it's a perfect example what you said about psychics. I mean, a psychic will go in and say 100 things that are wrong and 10 things that are right. And then people who are predisposed to believe in psychic readings will walk away and go, my gosh, they got so many things right. I can't believe it. They know everything about me. And it's just bad record keeping in your brain.
As a preacher, I would not have billed myself as a charlatan. I didn't, even to this day, I will tell you, I was not a charlatan. However, I had this reputation of being able to tell people things that there was no way I could know. I could tell people things that and part of that, number one, you're right. The ones that I was wrong never really came back to bite you in the butt because you're the pastor and nobody can do that. But one specific case, and in examining it in hindsight, I realized I was gaming myself as well as gaming him, and the congregation. I knew that when he was 12 years old, his dad had left around Christmas time. They never saw him again. At that point, they didn't. Later on, I think he came back into the picture and then he passed away. But at this time in this kid's life, and at this point, he's just out of the Marines, so he's going to be early 20s. But back when he was 12 years old, I remembered his dad had left around Christmas time and never showed up again, just disappeared off the planet. And it was before Christmas, and I knew this. Maybe he was younger than that. Maybe he was not. I don't know. But anyway, kid. And I knew that much of the story, and that was really about all I knew. And he had been in the military. And then I knew that I could tell by, call it gaydar if you want to, something like that. I knew he was struggling with issues of sexuality. And I made some statements that were pretty pointed. I said, God is your father. He knows about the Christmas present in the closet that was never given to anyone. He knows what's in that box, and you do too. He knows what you're hiding in the closet, and it's more than just a present, and he wants to set you free from that. Now, you would think from just hearing those words that, wow, God just told this preacher something. I was talking figuratively about the Christmas present. I didn't know he still had the damn present in his closet. But anyway, to this day, this guy is a preacher. He is a Pentecostal preacher to this day because of that message that I gave, which was totally and completely bullshit. The point I'm making here is I knew things. I didn't tell him anything that wasn't based on something I knew. And I think a whole lot. And I was not trying to scam the guy.
Right.
I was just telling what I thought God gave me to say. And I think there are a lot of preachers out there doing the same thing. But far more than that, there are a lot of congregations that only hear the ones that were right and never hear the ones that were wrong.
Yeah. It's a human problem. I mean, the best scientists in the world can make mistakes based on confirmation bias. You embrace what fits your worldview, your beliefs, and you just kind of keep walking past, look the other way when things contradict you. That's why it's so hard to change people. It's so hard to get, when they grow up with a belief and it's deep within them, it's very hard to get them to reconsider because it just makes so much sense to them because they spend all their life piling up evidence on one side and ignoring evidence on the other side. So yeah, I mean, I would never assume, I'm sure the vast majority of preachers and probably a good percentage of psychics are completely sincere. They're just self-deluded because of, primarily confirmation bias.
And then you add to it the Christian problem of if God answers a prayer, or if the thing comes out the way you prayed, we thank God for it. But if it comes out the other way, then we thank God for, like the country song says, thank God for unanswered prayers, So he's got an out. Even if it doesn't work, he's got an out. So the bottom line is people remember the ones that came out the way they prayed, and the ones they didn't, they've got his back. They say, well, my faith wasn't strong enough, or it was better for me in the long run. God sees from, our ways and his way, so many ways. So,
Yeah, I lived in the Cayman Islands, and hurricanes were a big problem there, obviously, and it's a very, very conservative Christian community, and they would constantly, pray about hurricanes if they're on the way, and if the hurricane missed us, people would call in the radio talk shows, and they would talk about how God steered the hurricane away and saved us. But if a hurricane hit us, it was God warning us to straighten up and stop gambling and drinking or whatever. So no matter what happened, it was always the right answer is what God wanted to do, So it's a kind of a silly logic.
Yeah. And while we're talking about logic, your next book coming out, I want to talk about that because it's going to be a really good follow-up to 50 Ways. And that is, I'm going to let Deanna handle most of the talking. See, what people don't realize, they think I'm the brains of this operation. I'm really not. I'm the touchy-feely, emotional kind of guy, and Deanna's the brains.
And he's the beauty.
Well, no. But, people say, how do you do a podcast? And I'm like, let me hook you up with Deanna on that one because I know how to record an audio file. That's where I'm done,
I handle all the internet stuff and, I try to do marketing and things like that. And, I gather the information for our interviews. And so in gathering information for this interview, I listened to your interview with Chris Mooney on Point of Inquiry in 2008. And it was about 50 reasons people give for believing in a God. And there was a really interesting question that he asked you. He said, if the reasons people give for believing in a God were similar to those of the reasons that people give for supernatural claims, pseudoscience, psychics, etc. So was that some kind of unintentional foreshadowing, or did you have it in mind maybe to write this book already?
I don't know. I think it was inevitable that I would write the book that's just come out called 50 Popular Beliefs That People Think Are True, because I've always been very interested, not just with religion, but all sorts of beliefs that just are unlikely to be true, if not obviously untrue. And it frustrates me because I think deep down I'm sort of an optimist and I really care about the world. And I just think that humankind could do so much better if we weren't stumbling around chasing all these silly ideas that are just, in most ways, a complete waste of time, to be honest. I mean, I think with better education, and not just education with facts, but if we educated children better on how to think for themselves and think critically and to ask questions, and if we promoted the concept that it's okay to say, I don't know, that ignorance is not a horrible sin. Ignorance is actually okay. Ignorance is a starting point to discovery and exploration. I used to teach science and history to young children, and I would constantly tell them, I'd say, hey, you know what? It's okay to not know things. Don't make up an answer. It's all right. The smartest people in the world, there's more they don't know than what they do know. Okay, so don't ever feel obligated, because that's the problem we have with everything from miracles to UFO sightings to just about everything. We see, you're in a house and you hear a creak on the wooden floor and you say, that's an unidentified sound. It must be a ghost. No, you just don't know what it was. You see a light in the sky, you can't identify it. Doesn't mean it's a spaceship. You have no right to jump to that conclusion. You don't know. It's okay to say, I don't know, until you know. That doesn't mean you surrender to ignorance. It means you use ignorance to motivate you and inspire you to go find out the answers. But until you find out the answers, just accept, I don't know. That's the problem with religion. That's why religion's so popular, because it seems like most humans are just absolutely unwilling to say, I'm not really sure where we came from. I'm not really sure what happens when I die, and I don't know what's going to happen next week. I don't know. And rather than just admit that, I think many people just run, as fast as they can towards somebody who's saying, "Oh, wait, I know what's going to happen next week. I know exactly where you came from, and I know exactly what happens when you die. Here are the answers." And it seems all warm and inviting and reassuring, maybe, but it's really just false hope, false beliefs.
Yeah, I use that line forever. I don't know what tomorrow holds, but I know who holds tomorrow.
Oh, you are a slick one, I tell you. This guy was the most dangerous preacher there ever was. I'm so glad he's out of the business.
You know what, Rich? I want to, just so I don't let time get away, I want to compliment you, because I can just barely imagine how tough a journey that must be to be so deep into a religion like that, and to just have to confront your own thoughts and to be honest enough, and then find the courage to actually reverse course like that. I mean, that's really tough, because I've actually communicated with a couple of preachers who are still preaching, and they just are absolute atheists. They read my book, and it was a part of the process where they finally just all the confidence in their beliefs just fell away. And now they've, through emails, they've told me that they're really just tormented, because that's all they know how to do. That's all they're trained to do, is be a preacher, and that's how they make their living. They have a wife, and they're not sure if the wife will stick with them, and and now they feel horrible because they feel like they're living a lie. And I really sympathize with people who have to, face that choice. I mean, I would always recommend being honest, because I don't think you'll be happy if you spend your whole life, kind of living a lie. But I really admire you for finding the courage to do that. You're a good example, because if you can do that as a professional, I mean, you had a lot more at stake than just some, guy like me who might be working at Burger King or something and has to, change, course within his own mind. I mean, so you set a good example just for the rest of us out there that, you can, no matter how far down the road you are, if you're a Scientologist, if you're addicted to astrology, whatever it is, you can change course in your life. You really can.
And that's the whole point of living after faith. That's one of the things, when I realized what I believed was wrong, I realized that the church I was a part of was actually a cult, that it didn't measure up really biblically. Before I became atheist, I went away for a couple of weeks, didn't tell the church where I was, didn't even tell my wife where I was, and did contact her with cell phone, but I was gone for a couple of weeks. And what the whole purpose of that was to dig through my heart and myself, my mind, and say, can I be the guy that wakes up every morning knowing he's lying about everything he stands for?
Yeah. And
I couldn't be that guy. I mean, that is just not who I am, and I couldn't be that guy. And that really forced me to make some decisions. But I look back, and they were the best decisions I've ever made. You mentioned people have a lot at stake. I did lose my marriage, basically contact with that entire world. I was excommunicated, disfellowshipped, put out, my entire world really ended. And when I went away for those 2 weeks, I knew that it was going to cost me everything. But one of the things I say often is I really didn't know exactly how much everything really was. And it was a lot. But you can do it. You can make the journey from being locked in a belief system that really isn't honest and doesn't work to one that is based on the fact that, number one, I don't know isn't the end of the story, but it's a beginning of an important journey. You mentioned losing a lot. I just this week found out two of my friends who are both former ministers are now involved in divorces, and that's part of the cost. I mean, it happens an awful lot, and I'd never try to sell the cost of it short because I know the cost is good. But there is a group that has help available for people who are in that very place.
Our friend Jerry DeWitt, who is executive director of Recovering from Religion, which is our affiliate organization. We do Living After Faith is the official podcast of recoveringfromreligion.org. He is the first graduate of the Clergy Project, which was set up by Dan Barker, the Richard Dawkins Foundation, Daniel Dennett, and it's basically a kind of an online support group, totally anonymous, totally shielded and well vetted for clergy who no longer believe.
Yeah, I've read about that. Yeah, that seems like a good thing. It really does.
That's kind of one of the things we talk about a lot on Living After Faith is providing support networks, providing, even if it's just, online friendship, making a community, a place for people who are leaving their faith, a softer place for them to fall onto. And, even if it's just people on a message board like the Clergy Project is right now, it's really, really important for people to know that while their world may be ending and they may lose everything, there's a lot out there that they can gain too.
Right. Absolutely. I've got a question here, and we're going to talk about the new book.
It is 50 popular beliefs that people think are true.
I'm itching to ask this question. What is number one thing that I believe that really isn't true?
Let's see. Let me make a guess. Probably that that the Baltimore Ravens will reach the Super Bowl. Not going to happen.
I like that. No, from your book, what are some of the top? What's the top thing?
Yeah, well, no, they're not ranked by popularity, but it would have to be the religion. I have an actual section in the book. What it is, first of all, let me explain. It's a grand tour of popular beliefs that people hold and they're convinced they're true. And I sort of look at them through the lens of science and skepticism. And it's very similar to 50 Reasons People Go for Believing in a God, in the sense that I'm not preachy and I'm not, trying to just win a debate. I'm just showing people why Bigfoot is probably not out there, why every little light in the sky is probably not a spaceship, why miracles probably aren't anything supernatural. And I just kind of explain it in brief chapters, easy to read language, so that people can, hopefully go, well, wow, I never looked at it that way. And they walk away a little bit changed forever for the better, I think. And so if you're talking popularity, you'd have to go right back to religion again, because there's a section on religion that I have where I talk about, there's a chapter, My God is the Real God. And I talk about how everybody thinks their God is the right one and their holy book is the correct one. And I explain how there's just so many contradictions, and the true landscape of religious belief in our world is far different from how most people view it. I just show the raw numbers and the history, how many, there have been hundreds and hundreds of thousands of distinct religions throughout history and prehistory probably. And there have been literally millions of gods. And humans have confidently claimed that all these are absolutely true, absolutely real. And then some of them fade away. Some become very popular and then fade away. And it's just and it all comes down really to 99% of the time is where you're born, what time period, who your parents are, and that's it. That's what you're going to think is absolutely true. And it's pretty easy to point out the weaknesses in such confidence. And so, I have a chapter on prayer, miracles, angels, and gods, as I said, and those would be the most popular. But having said that, you would be surprised how popular UFO belief is, for example, and I have an interesting take on the UFO thing, because I am a huge lifelong fan of the scientific search for extraterrestrial life. I'm very hopeful. I don't know if it'll be intelligent life, but I believe there's an extremely good chance that there is life in the universe.
When you look at the number of galaxies we know about, the number of planets, stars, the number of planets, there has to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe not, but I think so. My hunch is there is, and I think it's just fascinating. And we live in a really exciting time because, we're figuring out better ways to listen for possible signals that are bouncing around in the universe with SETI, and NASA's sending up new and better probes all the time, robots to explore moons and worlds out there. So there's a chance, in our lifetime, we may actually find life on another planet, and that'll be really cool. So having said all that, I'm a complete skeptic when it comes to UFOs, because, there's just something that's unidentified moving around up in the sky. There's many other explanations. And then if you can't even come up with a good alternative explanation, you just have to accept, I don't know. You jumping to the extraordinary conclusion that it's a spaceship visiting us from another world. It's just not warranted, but that's extremely popular. And then believe it or not, psychics are popular. Haunted houses, extremely popular. Like probably, think it's even higher in the UK than in America. Like more than half the people in the UK, I think, believe in haunted houses, which is interesting. And there's strange surveys. Doing all the research, there's weird results from surveys. Like you'll have fewer people believe in ghosts than believe in haunted houses, which is strange because what are they haunted with? And then I make a point, which is just trying to be funny, but I say, well, wait a minute, hold on. How can, say, 45% of Americans believe in haunted houses when 70% or 75% of Americans are Christians? Because if Christians believe in the Holy Spirit or the Holy Ghost, don't they believe in, every church in America is haunted at least on Sunday, right? I mean, doesn't that qualify as a haunted house?
Absolutely.
Plus, that kind of contradicts the whole soul thing, because if you're a Christian, souls go either to heaven or to hell. And, there's no provision,
Exactly.
Biblically or Christianity-wise, for spirits to be wandering around on earth. So
Right.
that contradicts everything too. But, people are really good at compartmentalizing our beliefs, as you were talking about earlier, that cognitive dissonance as well as the confirmation bias can make you just, I forget that things don't always click.
Or the soul could be on its way to the bus station to catch a bus to heaven or something, and it just haunts a house on the way or something like that. I mean, there's all kind of possibilities. Yeah. But near-death experiences as proof of some kind of afterlife, that's very popular. That's in the book. Just many, many things. Area 51, I've got the Roswell, the alleged Roswell crash. Lots of stuff. This was a fun book to do. It really was. I mean, I deal with, the rapture, the 2012 prophecy that the Maya actually didn't make, but everybody says they did. There's just so many things. It was a really fun book because this stuff, even though I take it seriously and I do understand that the irrational beliefs are destructive and they cause just inexcusable harm in the world, it's still exciting and fun to think about this stuff sometimes. Atlantis, all these topics are just great to research and write about and think about because it is exciting. We're human. We love great stories. And most of these things, they're based on just great stories, like campfire tales. And we can't resist those. Our brains are wired to love a good story. And that's one reason science has such a hard problem overcoming crazy beliefs, because usually crazy beliefs are based on really good stories, and the science, all the hard numbers and data just doesn't quite add up to be as attractive. It doesn't match it. So anyway, this book is a lot of fun to write, and the reaction to it has been fantastic. So far, I figured I was a little worried as I wrote it because I thought, my God, you know what I've done? I've created a book here that is pretty much guaranteed to anger or irritate everybody because I put so much in it. There's got to be one chapter that upsets everybody. I don't think there's anybody that would agree with every single chapter, because for example, I have a chapter on race, the concept of race, and I point out how while biological diversity is real, and that while cultural race groups do exist and they have very serious implications for health and standard of living and stuff like that, there is no such thing as naturally occurring biological categories in the way we think they are. There's not a thing called black people, white people, Asian people, for example, that nature imposed on us. It's just not real. And we've invented these categories in our minds, and then we've, proceeded over the centuries to just reinforce belief in them. But see that, a lot of people would read that and go, oh, that's crazy, but I think I make a pretty good case for it. So yeah, I've made a book that's guaranteed to irritate everyone. So I'm not sure how well it's going to do.
As far as race goes, actually, I wanted to mention that because you wrote an entire book about that topic.
Right.
Race and Reality, I believe it's called.
Right.
Race and Reality, his second book. And that's a fantastic one from the reviews as well. We haven't, unfortunately, had a chance to read all of your books yet. But one of the things that I like to do, going back to pseudoscientific and nutty beliefs, is that I like to try to explain to people I know when we're talking in person about something, how they might think something is true when it's not, and how to kind of guard against that. When you can say, well, we have confirmation biases where we ignore evidence that we don't like, etc. When you can explain that to somebody, what you're doing is not directly challenging their belief, but you're giving them a reason why something might appear to be true. So you're not calling them stupid. You're not, being confrontational even about the belief. You're just saying, hey, I've done this, you've done this, we've all done this, we've all believed things for, maybe reasons that weren't quite so good. And this is just how our brains work. Like I'll explain about agenticity to someone who thinks there are shadows that are ghosts. I'll say, well, our brains are wired so that we see humans, we see faces, we see shapes of people in things that are not actually like that, because that's how we work. And so that's very easy for us to think we saw a face in that tree or a person in the corner. And, I'm not saying ghosts aren't real and it's silly to believe in them. I'm explaining why that might be. And it sounds like you take a pretty similar approach.
Yeah, exactly. I stress repeatedly in this book that believing in these sorts of things is not tied in an absolute sense to how innately intelligent you are or how highly educated you are. Not at all. You have to there's one thing that makes you vulnerable to this, and that's being human. Okay, we're all human, so we all can and do believe things that aren't true because our minds mislead us so easily. And I explain that, something as simple as memory. I mean, our memory, scientists have learned in the last probably 10, 20 years more about memory than we've ever known before. And it's horrifying. I mean, I was actually, I talked to one of the top memory researchers in the world, and I was shocked. I was absolutely stunned. I wish we had time to go into it deeper, but we do not remember things in the way we think we do. So you always have to be on guard against your own memories. You can't even trust yourself, because we have to, just to say brief, the way I explain it is that people, and a study actually found this, vast majority of people think that our memory works as like a video camera or an audio recorder, and that we see something and it's stored in your mind like a DVD, and we can play it back. Maybe not with 100% accuracy, but pretty good. That's how memory works. Well, no, it's not even close. Our memories are constructive and they're associative. They're put together like little stories in our head. And the way I describe it in the book, so people can understand it better, the way our memory works is like this. It's like you have this little old man who lives inside your head. And then when you want to call up a memory, you basically have to tap this guy on the shoulder and say, hey, old fella, tell me about the time, I did really great in the high school football game. And the old man sits around his little campfire inside your skull, and he tells you the story, okay? And he tells you the story about what happened in that football game. And the bad part is he leaves out stuff. He edits. He adds a few things to make it more interesting. He cuts out everything he thinks might not be relevant. And so you're basically getting a story based on his assumptions about what you need to know, okay? And that's your memory. And this is all confirmed. I mean, just last year, the New Jersey State Supreme Court had a big ruling where they said that eyewitness testimonies are just no longer good enough to stand alone for major crimes. Just not good enough because they're so flawed, so faulty. And so when anybody tells me, I remember the time, last week, I saw this and I remember this and this detail and all, I'm always skeptical. And I try to explain, hey, if you've got human memory, you cannot be trusted. That's why we need science. We need evidence.
I think I remember reading about the research that you're talking about there, and that instead of a video camera, it's like every single time you call up a memory of something, you pull in the actors and the props and the director and the writers again, and you make them do the whole thing over again. They're rewriting, redoing the entire story according to a theme in your head. And some of those themes are, I'm a smart person, I'm a good person, I don't make mistakes. We flatter ourselves with our retelling of the story. And we don't mean to do that. Y'all, we are not really selfish, conceited bastards, I swear. It's just the way we are. We have a hard time with uncomfortable stories. stories.
Scientists have found even the so-called flashbulb memories, like say on 9/11, these dramatic events, the day you were in a car crash, we have this sense that we remember every detail of that moment. It was so important, so much emotion. And most of us, I used to deeply believe that, oh yeah, I can remember that exactly. The moment I was told something important, I remember that day. Older people, the day JFK was assassinated, that kind of thing. The fact is, study after study has revealed that that's just not true. People will get it wrong as to where they were. They did studies. They had people write down a brief summary of where they were on 9/11 during the 9/11 attacks when they first heard about them. The next day, okay, they'll have people write it down, and then you check back 5 years later and say, okay, where were you the day that you heard about the 9/11 attacks? Describe that moment. And they get it completely wrong. They'll say they were with different people. They were in a different building. They were, just the context is completely changed in their heads, in their memory. It's shocking. And it's not just memory. It's vision as well. People aren't aware of this, but you don't really see anything, okay? What you think you see is what your brain is telling you that you should see, and probably is what's there. Okay, and magicians have been making a living off this for years and years and years. We anticipate. Your brain will actually fill in the gaps, the visual gaps, and just imagine what's supposed to be there. That's how they do the missing coin trick and all these kind of things. And if you're not aware of this stuff, you just get fooled so easily. And it's easy to see how all these flaws in memory, vision, how they translate into drawing false conclusions about what you see or experience.
Before I really discovered skepticism, more formal social skepticism as a movement, there were a lot of things that I was like, I think that's bullshit, but I don't know why. And I didn't have the language to discuss whether, memory or cognitive biases.
I think you've been able to say bullshit for a long time.
Oh, that's true. That's a magical word. I remember being 11 or 12 and a friend's aunt was a big believer in crystal healing. And she would, tell you that she wears this crystal and it makes her feel better. And I was going, that sounds like bullshit, but I could imagine how if you think that crystal's going to make you feel better, then it will. And, sure enough, we now have the language and the science to understand why that is and why these interesting, strange beliefs are so easily reinforced in our minds.
When I met Deanna, I was not a skeptic. I had a girlfriend who was a
Queen of the Wooniverse.
Yes, Queen of the Wooniverse. She was into every kind of, you take chondroitin for this, you take blue silver for that, you take all these different kind of things.
You can't trust water, you can't trust Teflon, you can't, you have to
all
take homeopathy.
Kind of yeah. And, I had never looked at that. And then Deanna was my introduction to skepticism. And I don't remember the first thing. I said something and she said, that's bullshit, right? And I'm like, no. And then, so I began studying skepticism. So it sounds to me like this next book, the one that's just come out, is kind of for people who have already made the step to atheism. Now they're kind of looking at other things in their life that they're thinking about. This may be something that gives them some paths, some questions, some things to think about in general skepticism, not just the religion question.
Oh, yeah. There are many examples of hardcore atheists who are just, they fall hook, line, and sinker for other things that just a tiny bit of skepticism would blow away.
Well, like Bill Maher is an anti-vaxxer.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's sad. He is such, he's such a vigorous, aggressive skeptic when it comes to religion. If he applied 10% of that to alternative medicine, it wouldn't work in his head at all. It's just, that's why, I preach that in the book as well, that you've got to be consistent and vigorous with everything, with everything. You can't just turn it off on certain things. You just can't do it. I worked with a woman, for example, who, constantly laughed at religion, thought it was just ridiculous. How can people fall for that? And yet she was absolutely convinced that there was this little girl in, I think, the Ukraine or Romania or some Eastern Europe country that could had X-ray vision and could see through people and find tumors and identify them and all this kind of stuff. And it was just ridiculous, but she would fall for that sort of thing. And yet she could see right through the other. It's very interesting. I mean, I'm constantly reassessing, reevaluating how I view the world, and I'm wondering, what's creeping in on me? Is there anything I'm not applying sufficient skepticism to so that I keep, it's almost like your brain is a garden, and you've got to tend the garden. You got to keep pulling weeds all the time.
Yeah, one of the things I do is, for fun, I do a lot of arguing, I guess we would say. A lot of, I try to do it gentle when it's warranted and aggressively when it also is necessary. But one of the things I do is when I start making an argument with somebody, they say something like, well, you can't leave your black cat outside on Halloween because, the Satanists might get it. And I start writing, well, obviously that's not true, dude. I mean, there's no Satanists that really do that kind of stuff anyways. And then I go, wait a second, I better check my facts and make sure that I'm remembering things, because I'm going, okay, I remember reading something on Snopes or somewhere about how black cats really never actually disappear on Halloween, but I better make sure. So I find the articles, I find the references that I need, and then I reread them and I go, okay. And a lot of times I'll find that some little part of that is tweaked in my brain. It's become more certain, or a detail is wrong. In the case of the black cats, what I found was that they had declared it inconclusive, not wrong, not false, but inconclusive due to lack of evidence or any reliable reports, because it's not the kind of thing that you can say never happens, but it's something you can deem, unlikely.
Yeah, but who's measuring the black cats that go missing, in September and November, and maybe black cats are easier to run over than white cats, so they have a higher death rate anyway, so I don't know. And more people are on the roads on Halloween night or something. I don't Oh, there's so many
Friday
things.
the 13th. It was yesterday, Friday the 13th. So same question. I had an actual vet. My profession, people know I'm a journalist. So vet calls me up and says, hey, let's do a story on this because it happens every year. My first question is, how many cats have you treated for this? And how many people have come to you with this? And he says, well, it's never actually happened here, but
I heard it from a very reliable source.
Yeah, it's like the poison, razor blades in the apple, poison candy, all that stuff. If you actually look, it never happens. Never. I actually have a chapter in the book about how television news freaks everybody out by just overemphasizing and overexposing these horrible, freaky, weird ideas and events, and it gives everybody a distorted view of the world. And it's not just that television news exaggerates bad stuff. Sometimes they ignore bad stuff, and I give the example of how last summer was spent with the Casey Anthony, murder trial and all this stuff with the woman who supposedly killed her daughter. And there was virtually no television news attention to a famine that was going on in East Africa at the time, and something like, I think 50,000 children. I did the math, and I think estimate something like 50,000, very young children, babies, died during the period that they were airing that trial, about this one child. And it was interesting. And most people think the Middle East is so extremely violent and this terrible place with constant violence. And yet they don't know anything about Central Africa, where there's been a civil war going on, just millions of people dead. It's more violence than we've seen since probably World War II. And the average American knows nothing about it because it's just not covered. They don't have the camera crews there and stuff. It doesn't have the religious connection like Jerusalem and all this stuff. So it's just not as appealing. It gets left out. So we get a very distorted view.
One of the things I want to go back to is one of the things I found so fascinating about 50 Ways was the reasons that people give for believing in a God, and I'm going to assume that probably carries through in this book. The reasons that people give worldwide, you didn't just ask Christians, but you asked people worldwide, the reasons were all the same.
Yeah, the overlap is just tremendous. I mean, and it makes sense if you think about it, because basically the equation is all the same variables. You've got you've got humans with human fears and human yearnings, And you've got religions with promises and answers for those same fears and yearnings. So it makes sense that everybody's going to kind of think in the same path on these things, even though the names of the gods are different, the names of the books are different, all that stuff. They dress differently, they pray differently, but it's kind of the same sort of matrix thing. It's not really a lot of difference, really isn't, which is it makes the job, I think, of the skeptic easier, because if you can make a Muslim think twice about their worldview, about their religious beliefs, then you can do the same thing with a Christian or a Jew or a Scientologist or whoever. It's kind of the same. It's the same reasoning. You're just bringing up the same questions, slightly tweaked in a different, just a little bit, but the framework is essentially the same.
There's one thing that I've noticed a lot lately, especially in talking about religion and all those pseudoscientific beliefs that skeptics typically apply our skills to, is the overwhelming good feeling that people get when they're praying, when they're meditating, when they, take something they think is a medicine. They really feel these powerful positive feelings, and they go, I know this is true because I feel it to be true. And that's one that I've noticed a lot lately. And, there are real scientific reasons why we feel these overwhelming, warm, connected, universe-changing feelings about certain things.
The way I approach that is you just explain to the person, well, you may feel really good when you pray to God, but that doesn't mean a God is actually there listening to you. That doesn't mean that's not evidence that a God exists. That just is evidence that something about the act of praying makes you feel good. And I think it's more likely that the act of praying makes people feel good because people pray to all kinds of gods in all kinds of ways, and they feel good. And all these gods can't be real. They can't all exist. They're too contradictory. It may have felt good to pray to Zeus. It may feel good to pray to Jesus, but they're both not real. Either one or none don't exist, okay?
I think Julia Sweeney mentioned it in her Letting Go of God audio play, as that she felt like when she prayed to God or to Jesus that she had a friend there who was listening to her, and just somebody listening to her, and she feels like if someone's listening that they care about you is a very powerful part of that, because God isn't there, but if you feel like there is someone there. I mean, I talk to Rich all the time about my problems, and that always makes me feel better.
Am there.
And he is there. Yeah. The difference is he can pour me a glass of wine.
Buddhists are also a powerful case against anyone who's claiming that prayer is somehow the good feelings of prayer somehow prove the existence of a God, because Buddhists they've had their brains scanned while they're meditating, and they go through all kind of blissful, wonderful, happy states. And a traditional Orthodox Buddhist doesn't believe in any gods. I mean, it's a godless religion. There's some forms of Buddhism that do, but so how do you explain that? I mean, they're feeling as good or better than any Christian or Muslim who's praying, and yet they're not. They don't even think a God is real. They're not talking to a God, and yet they're getting that that mental feedback, that positive kickback in the same way. I mean, there are many things. Feeling good about something. People take homeopathic medicine and they may feel good, but it doesn't mean it's anything more than water. It's not working. I mean, it's a placebo effect is powerful. There's many, many explanations for getting a positive result from something that is really based in nothing. I mean, it's just not good enough as evidence.
If I remember correctly, the Buddhist meditations and the prayers have been studied with like MRIs or something, where they light up about the same area of the brain. And it's an area of the brain that kind of is thought to be sort of the root of our God beliefs, our supernatural beliefs. It's, it served some kind of good function at some point evolutionarily, but now is hampering us maybe a little in some places.
A lot of people have the attitude that religion makes people feel good. sacred, therefore it should be hands off, leave it alone. But I'm of the belief that people can be absolutely fine without religion. You don't, and even if you feel you want to be religious and go to church on a Sunday or whatever and go to picnics and stuff, that's fine too. But there's absolutely no reason to think that you have to take it really seriously and think it's all true and there's really some guy up in a cloud looking down on you constantly and all. You don't have to go that far down the road. You really don't. You could be a cultural Jew or a cultural Christian or a cultural Muslim, You could just enjoy the social aspects of it without actually sacrificing your reason and your doubt and stuff like that. Because it's proven. I mean, there's like 1 billion people in the world, 1 billion, more than 1 billion, who are just non-believers. I mean, societies like Denmark, Sweden, they're just filled with non-believers. And they're fine. They're okay. They're functioning. They raise families. They have kids. They're not all out, burning down buildings and rampaging. It's okay. You can be fine. I mean, there's so much in life that can be fulfilling and satisfying. Like I said, children, you have pets, you have sports, you have fitness, you have reading, creativity, art. There's just so many things, friendship. So many things that just bring absolute joy in life. We're not so weak that we need religion in the way we're often told, and we definitely don't need it to behave ourselves. I mean, that's crazy. It's not, the world's prisons are not filled with atheists. They're not. Okay. They're filled with people. They're filled with people who are believers and were believers. I mean, that is just a fact. It's nothing. There's never been any kind of study to show that once people leave religion, they become bad people. It's nothing at all like that. And the way many religious people, not all, of course, but the way many religious people behave around the world is just absolute proof that religion is no guarantee of moral behavior. I mean, it doesn't mean, once you've got religion, once you believe in a God, you're going to be a wonderful, warm, and fuzzy person. No, not at all. Absolutely, it's not. The biggest hellholes on earth are the most intensely religious places on earth.
Absolutely.
The least religious places on earth are the most crime-free, sophisticated, progressive societies with the lowest infant mortality rates, the highest literacy rates. I mean, and it even works in America. If you look at the United States of America, the states that are the least religious, as measured by church attendance and that kind of thing, the least religious states have the lowest crime, the lowest teen pregnancy, the highest literacy rates, the highest graduation rates. The states that are the most intensely religious have the highest teen pregnancy, the higher crime. I mean, it's just the pattern is right there. And I'm not necessarily saying that, I would never go so far and say, well, religion causes all crime and stuff like that. Not at all. But I'm just saying that the argument made by religious people that religion is necessary for good behavior, moral behavior, happiness, and all this it just does not match the numbers. It's not true.
One of the things that I often argue is that if there is, for instance, the Christian God, if that God exists, and if everything that we do worship-wise on earth is going to determine whether we are tortured for eternity in burning hell or have blissful, happy, lovey time on a cloud. Yeah. That really is the most important question, the most important motivation for anything. Because if that is true, then you really do have to focus on those things. And, rationality, evidence, reason, logic, none of that matters here on earth. Happiness, health, safety, love, companionship, none of those are as important as where am I going to go when I die? And I think that can be a very negative idea in that it causes people to abandon all other important things in life or maybe give them less emphasis and focus exclusively on thetheir religious claims.
I've butted heads with believers on this point that I think that most believers or many believers, they've really got it twisted in their head, and they think that the typical atheist believes in God, but has turned his back on that God and rejects that God and doesn't want to follow that God. And that's God so haters. Ridiculous. Yeah, it's so ridiculous because, I mean, who would do that? I mean, I wouldn't do that. I would. Well, that said, if the God of the Bible really did exist, I would have a lot of problems with him based on that story and all.
I reached that place. Yeah.
But that's not my case at all. I mean, I just don't think anybody's there. I don't think Apollo, Zeus, all these gods, I don't think they're real. I think it's most likely that humans have made these gods up, and they just don't exist. That's my point. So I'm not rejecting or defying something that's there. I'm just saying I don't think it's there. And that's a really important point that most believers just completely miss, because I don't understand what would they expect from somebody like you guys or me. Would they, I can't just flip a switch in my head and say, okay, I believe, I have to be shown, I have to be convinced. Something has to convince me that one or more of these gods are real if I'm going to worship them and believe in them. And if that doesn't happen, the only alternative would be, I guess, to lie and just pretend to believe. I mean, but wouldn't a God know that? So how can I, what am I left to do? And that's the thing that frustrates me too, is because the way I approach this whole topic of religion, and with any kind of extraordinary claim, is that I'm willing to be convinced. My mind is totally open. Show me, convince me, argue it into me. Make me change my mind. Show me the mountain of evidence, and I'll be right with you in a second. I won't hesitate. I'll change. But I don't feel the same from them. Because the majority of believers, they just seem emotionally invested to the point where they don't want to hear it. They don't want to change, and they don't want to consider changing. And that's very frustrating, because I think that's an unhealthy attitude, and I think it's bad for them. It really harms their life, because they're not trusting in their own minds. They're just putting up a wall and kind of living in a fantasy land that's perfect and can't be encroached on by other thoughts. And that's a really scary way to live, because it kind of comes down to what fantasy land you happen to live in. Because if you're born in North Korea and you think your current dictator is a god, like is some kind of a god, then that's kind of tragic. I think most people would agree, because it's just not true. He's just a human. But hey, if that's your world, you don't want to hear any skepticism, you don't want to hear any doubt, then that's what you're gonna live and die believing that, and that's sad. And so I always tell people, the way to live is like this. Have an open mind, listen to everybody, listen to questions, and more importantly, ask questions yourself, and be willing to change. There's nothing wrong with changing your mind.
One other question. Tell us where we can get the new book. Tell us just kind of a brief synopsis.
Okay, yeah, thanks. It's available everywhere. It's on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, bookstores around the world. If they don't have it on the shelf, they can order it for you in a couple of days, I'm sure. But once again, 50 popular beliefs that people think are true. It's an easy to read, kind of lighthearted at times. I try to be kind of upbeat and humorous. I'm not trying to make enemies. I'm trying to make friends with everybody. I'm a happy guy. I like people, so I'm not trying to yell at anybody or beat them over the head. But what I've done is taken, like I said, a grand tour of some popular beliefs that many, many people hold to be true. And I just simply show how there is room for doubt, how we need to ask some more questions about these beliefs, and I strongly emphasize people always think before you believe.
Our guest today, Guy P. Harrison.
He's a writer. He's been a news editor, a photographer, a travel writer, a journalist, someone after our own hearts. You can also find more information at guypharrison.com. And we'll put up links on our website and in the notes for this show where you can find his books, you can find his website. Thank you so much for talking with us today.
Deanna, Rich, I just want to say one more thing. Thanks very much for you guys having me on, but also thanks for all the work you do, okay? What you're doing is really important, and it's highly commendable, because you're making an effort to bring more light to the world, and Lord knows the world needs more light, okay?
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, keep up the good work, okay? Thank you very much.
I'm Deanna Joy Lyons.
I'm Rich Lyons.
Come laugh with me.
Thank you for listening to the Living After Faith podcast with Rich and Deanna Joy Lyons. Living After Faith is a podcast designed to help you as you leave religion and move forward with your life. We are the official podcast of RecoveringReligionists.com, a recovery group founded by Dr. Darrell Ray, the author of The God Virus. The music for this show is provided by Morrison's Prophecy. See livingafterfaith.com for a link to more music from Morrison's Prophecy. We welcome your feedback, and you can find phone numbers and email addresses at livingafterfaith.com, at facebook.com/livingafterfaith, and follow us on Twitter at LAF with me.